All right, so we've selected our plates for our wall. If you remember, our front wall here is going to be 12 foot long. So we have a 12 foot bottom and top plate. So we're going to lay out where our door is going to go and our stud location. So the first thing that we're going to do when we frame a wall is always frame the openings first. So if you remember, we have a 3'0" opening for our, or 3 foot door. So we need to figure out what that rough opening for that door is. It's a good idea whenever you are framing a wall to always know what door or window that you're going to put in before you start framing. So we have our door right here, and there's a lot of information right on the side panel of a door. It has the size of the door. We have a 36 by 80 door. That's a typical door. We have the swing of the door, if it's a right or left hand swing. And then we also have the important information of the rough opening, and that's the information we need for our framing. So our door is 36 by 80, but when we actually lay out our door, we're going to want to do a 38.5 by 82.5 opening. So we'll come over here, and just so we can remember, we'll do 38.5 by 82.5. And then what we're going to do is mark our center line, because that door is exactly in the center on this wall. So we'll come over here, hook on the end, mark 6 foot. Again, that's our center line. And then it's a good idea to just strike a line here and mark it with a C, so we know that it's a center line and it doesn't get confused with any other lines on our wall. So our width here is 38.5. So 38.5 divided by 2 is 19.25. We'll come here and mark 19.25 this way, and mark 19.25 this way. And then just double check. We got 38.5, perfect. All right, so that's gonna be our width to the door. So what we can do is come over here, strike a line, and then we're going to come off that line 1.5 inches. That's the thickness of our studs here. And this first one, if you remember from our completed wall, this is going to be our shoulder stud. So I like to mark that with an O. And then we'll come over one more, and this is going to be our king stud. Now if you remember, we have that shoulder stud. That's where that header sits on top of the wall, or on top of the stud here. And then we have our king stud, which we are able to nail into the side. So we're going to do the same thing over on this one. All right, shoulder and king. Now we have our opening for our door. If you want to double check, it's always a good idea, because it's horrible to get along the way and realize you have a wrong opening. We have 38.5, so it looks like we're good. Another thing that you can do right now at this point is figure out what size your header is. And basically what you'll do is come from your king stud, the inside of your king stud, to the other side, inside of your king stud. It looks like we have 41.5, which is exactly 3 inches larger than the opening. So what you can do if you have a volunteer is you can have them go and start cutting and putting together your header for your door. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do now is lay out the stud spacing. For this wall, it's going to be 16 on center. Walls and floors and decks, anything that you're framing, are typically either 16 or 24 on center. It's going to make a little bit more sense in a few minutes after we get the studs laid out. But basically the reason why we lay that out in those spacings is for two reasons. One, the wall for structure, that spacing is calculated to be able to carry the load of the roof. And two, our wall sheathing comes in 4x8 sheets. So if we have an 8-foot sheet that's coming from the end, it's going to land right in the middle of a stud. And that way, whenever we have this sheet ending, we can nail on one side of the stud. This next sheet coming in can nail on the other side of the stud. That's going to make more sense here in a minute or two when we get to that point. But I'm going to teach you how to do the 16 on center layout. All right, so what you want to do is hook on the end of your board You want to make sure both of your plates here are nice and flush on the end. That way you can just transfer each mark and it'll be a mirror image of each other when we flip these apart and put the studs in between. So we're going to come to our first 16-inch mark. On most tape measures, the 16 on center are usually highlighted in red, so you can just go to it really, really quickly. That way you don't have to do any math in your head. But if you have a little bit cheaper tape measure, sometimes they don't. You just add 16 continuously, and that's your 16 on center. So we'll come to this first 16-inch mark here, and we're not going to mark right on 16. We're actually going to come back 3/4 of an inch. And we do that because we want the edge of our stud to be at 15 1/4. That way the center of our stud is right at 16. A stud is 1.5 inches wide. If you divide that by 2, it's 3/4 of an inch. That's why we come back that 3/4. And we're going to do that to every 16-inch mark. So we have 32 here, we're going to come back 3/4. We have 48, we're going to come back 3/4. Now, we have our door opening here, and this is why we lay out our openings first. What we're going to want to do is any stud that lays within this door opening here is going to become a cripple stud, because we can't have a stud in the middle of our door, otherwise we can't walk through it. So we're going to come over here, again, subtract 3/4 of an inch at 64, and then we're going to mark it with a C, so we know it's a cripple stud. Again, we have another one inside the door, another cripple stud. Now we're outside the door again. So what we can do is go back to our normal layout here with regular studs. We're just going to finish that all the way along the door. Every 16-inch mark, we'll make a layout line. All right. So now we'll finish by striking a line. Again, this represents the edge of the stud. So it's a good idea to come over 1.5 inches and actually lay out that full stud mark. That way when you have a volunteer or a student that's framing your wall, they don't accidentally get confused with a mark like this. Yes, there's an X on this side, but sometimes they'll accidentally want to put it on this side of the line and screw up the layout. So if you actually draw the whole stud location, it creates less confusion. So we'll come over here and mark out all these. And again, we're in the door opening with these two here, so these are going to be cripple studs. All right. And then one last thing that I like to do when working with volunteers, we know that there's going to be a stud on the end. I don't usually mark it, but if you don't mark it for the students, they'll typically forget. So go ahead and mark out your end studs as well. All right. So now we have our full length studs, our shoulder studs, our king studs, and our cripple studs. And our wall is completely laid out now. So just to double check, you can take your tape measure, string it out across here, and every stud location, you should have a red number or a 16-inch mark right in the middle of every single one of your studs here. And it looks like the layout is on. So we have a completed laid out wall. So now that we have our plates completely laid out, we can take them to our location where we're going to be framing our wall. We can throw the studs in and start nailing it all together.